Hello, everyone, and welcome to Spaceflight Now's live coverage of SpaceX's third attempt to launch Starship Flight 10. I'm Will Robinson-Smith, reporter with Spaceflight Now. Very good to have you all here with us this afternoon. We're broadcasting from the Spaceflight Now News Bureau here at NASA's Kennedy Space Center. You're looking at live pictures of the Starship rocket there at Pad A, courtesy of our friends at Lab Padre. We are just under 2 hours out from the opening of the launch window for today's flight opportunity for Starship Flight 10. Weather is looking a little bit better than it was yesterday, so hopefully, if the weather continues to stay in SpaceX's favor and there are no technical issues, we'll finally see the flight of this more than 400-foot tall rocket from southern Texas. If you're joining us from our coverage over on the launch of the NOW's rideshare mission that just happened, launching from Vandenberg Space Force Base earlier this afternoon, welcome back. If this is your first launch broadcast with us today, welcome in. Our Spaceflight Now editor, Stephen Young, is running the technical operations of the broadcast as we're getting things rolling. I want to thank moderator Jeff Hansen for being back with us once more today, helping us out in the live chat. If you do see any of the other mods or just want to help Jeff out and keeping things kosher in the chat, we ask that you converse in English so that our moderators can respond as appropriate. Also, that you hold off on delving into overt politics or religion and don't type in all caps. Emojis are perfectly fine, but we just ask that you don't spam the chat with like a huge block of emojis that'll obscure the chat from others participating. Last but not least, we ask that you treat each other with the kindness and respect that you yourself would like to be treated. As we're getting rolling this afternoon, I want to thank the more than 1,500 of you who are watching with us live at the top of the stream. If you haven't already, you could do us a big favor just by clicking that like button beneath the video and sharing the stream. Allow some more folks to find their way into this live launch coverage. I want to give a shout out to our channel member community here on YouTube who help make these live launch opportunities possible. So thanks to folks like Michael Mizrahi, hopefully I pronounced that close to right, Cumulus Granatus, John McNulty, and many others. Let's see if we're just getting things rolling, so let a little more time pass. We'll see more members cruise on in throughout the count. Channel membership comes with a number of perks, including discounts at our online shop, which is shop.spaceflightnow.com. Access to member-only videos here on YouTube, access to our members-only Discord server, and of course the ability to watch all of our live launch liftoff moments from here in Florida in 4K. See, we also have Rick Donner with us today as well. And want to welcome in new channel member, the Lost Spark Art and Photography Studio, joining us with membership at the Mission Specialist level. Really appreciate that, Lost Spark Art. Glad to have you with us. Last little bit of housekeeping. If you have a comment or question about this mission or other goings-on in the realm of space or spaceflight, you can use the YouTube Super Chat feature to have your comment or query elevated for discussion, if of course we deem it appropriate for discussion. And not only will you be giving us some interesting things to talk about as we go on through the countdown today, but you'll also be supporting what we do here at Spaceflight Now, and that, my friends, is always greatly appreciated. As you can see out at Starbase, the venting at the tank farm adjacent to the pad is well underway as teams are conditioning the propellant before they move into the process of thermally conditioning the feed lines, and then getting into tanking the Starship rocket itself. Skies are far bluer over Starbase today. It's certainly a sign of improvement from what we saw yesterday. Taking a look out at the satellite view of things, looking at southern Texas from the GOES East satellite, you can see that there are some of those afternoon clouds that are bubbling up out in the Gulf and a little bit onshore as well, but the vicinity most immediately around Starbase, for now at least, seems to be fairly clear, so hopefully that'll continue to be the case and teams can move forward with a launch attempt. As I say that, within the last couple of minutes, SpaceX says they are counting down to the 10th flight of Starship, and they note that weather is currently 45% favorable for launch during the 60-minute window. So similar weather conditions to what they forecast for Sunday's launch attempt, which was, of course, scrubbed due not to weather primarily, but an issue with the ground side liquid oxygen systems connected to the ship upper stage. Those have since been resolved. Weather was the cause of the scrub yesterday, so hopefully conditions are good enough that when it gets right down to it, SpaceX will be able to launch this rocket today and not have to go to one more backup opportunity tomorrow. If, for whatever reason, that does end up being the case, looking at the weather for the rest of the week, looks like a sunny forecast for Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday coming up. So, again, we're all certainly hoping that they are able to move forward with a launch attempt today. We're not back here again tomorrow, but if that be the case, it should be a pretty beautiful launch opportunity for them in a 24-hour backup scenario tomorrow. So we shall see, and we'll keep you informed of any updates as we cruise on through the count, especially if there is an adjustment to the T0 for today's launch attempt. At this moment in time, though, SpaceX is 52 minutes, 3 seconds away from the flight of Starship Flight 10. Ship 37 up top of the more than 400-foot tall stack. Booster 16 down below. With less than 2 hours remaining on the clock, we are once again grateful to be joined by our friend and fellow space reporter, Stephen Clark, who is working alongside his colleague Eric Berger at Ars Technica, covering all things space tip to tail, from the U.S. to China and everywhere in between. Stephen, welcome back to the broadcast for round 3 of Flight 10.
Hey, good afternoon. Good afternoon, Will. So hopeful that today is the third time. The third time is the charm today. I'm here at the Rocket Ranch outpost, about a little over 3 miles away from the launch pad, along with Mr. Lab Padre here, looking out over the Starbase area, looking out at the launch pad with the Starship standing more than 400 feet tall out in the distance, and we're seeing some activity around the ground systems to prepare for propellant loading. Hopefully that will begin in an hour or so from now.
Fingers crossed. And we took a satellite view from the GOES East satellite, and we were just talking about how SpaceX says there's a 45% chance for favorable weather during their hour-long window today. But from the ground perspective, comparing today to both Sunday and yesterday, Monday, how is it feeling from a ground level view?
Yes, sir. Right now, the skies look much more favorable than they did this time yesterday, or this time on Sunday for that matter. So this is the best weather leading up to the launch window that we've seen so far. But we're still almost 2 hours away from the opening of the launch window, and things can change rapidly. But right now, plenty of blue sky over the launch site, some clouds off to the east and also to the west, but nothing, no cloud cover directly over the launch pad at this time.
Well, that's certainly good to hear. Interesting to note that today's forecast is 10% less favorable than it was coming into yesterday. So we'll have to keep an eye on how things develop over the course of the next hour and 49 minutes. But given that we're going to be talking about this launch now for a third day for folks that are joining us once again, we will, of course, be going over some ground that has been trodden on before, but we'll try to keep things as fresh as possible, talk about some of the new elements that have happened in the past 24 hours. Today at 1 o'clock this afternoon was actually the first in a series of in-person meetings that happened here on the Space Coast, talking not about Starship missions down in southern Texas, but actually the future of Starship here in Florida. Want to go to some video now that I shot at that first meeting, which you can see a fairly decent-sized crowd for 1 o'clock on a Tuesday afternoon as people gathered at the Kennedy Space Center Visitor Complex to learn about Starship operations at Launch Complex 39A, which are set to begin in the 2026 timeframe at the earliest. There were a series of placards that were set around the room so folks could get a better idea of how the Federal Aviation Administration did their environmental evaluation for LC-39A. You can see that was a graphic that we showed you during yesterday's broadcast. All of these placards in placard form as well as in slide form are also available online for folks to peruse at their leisure, so you can get a much more leisurely look at the impact from the sonic booms of both ship and the Super Heavy booster as they come back to the pad, a look at the water impacts expected for Starship operations at the Kennedy Space Center, and much, much more. Of course, this is an information session and an opportunity for folks to give their input to the Federal Aviation Administration. There's another meeting coming up tonight that begins at 6 p.m. and then a couple more in-person ones in Cape Canaveral on Thursday the 28th. And that's coming up once again at 1 to 3 and then again from 6 to 8 in the evening. So plenty of opportunity for folks in Central Florida to offer their thoughts and get some info about what SpaceX is planning for Pad 39A here at the Kennedy Space Center. But Stephen, I'll throw it to you. Obviously, bringing Starship to Florida is no small thing, and as a former Florida resident yourself, your thoughts about how much people will be impacted by this and how this is going to impact the Space Coast writ large.
Good questions, Will. I think the public impact at around Cape Canaveral and Brevard County will be, I think, minimal, actually, because people there are very accustomed to rocket launches and more recently booster landings and sonic booms. I think the bigger question is what the other launch companies operating out of Cape Canaveral think, and if they have any influence on their efforts to restrict or push back on the number of launches that SpaceX plans to conduct with Starship there at Kennedy Space Center and the Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. Of course, they have their own competitive reasons to be against or to protest SpaceX's proposals, given that they're competitors with SpaceX and Starship could eat into their business going forward. But we've seen, as we see on this map here, the arcs of where personnel will need to be cleared and evacuated during a Starship launch and our Starship static fire test. The yellow is for a launch. The darker shade of orange-red is for a static fire test. And as you can see, other launch pads will need to be evacuated as currently foreseen. They'll need to evacuate pad 39B and pad 41 for a Starship static fire test at pad 39A. So that will affect NASA's Artemis Space Launch System as well as United Launch Alliance. And then the broader swath extends farther from pad 39A for a launch includes pad 40, which is SpaceX's own Falcon 9 launch pad, which would need to be evacuated and cleared for any Starship launch from pad 39A. I think there's going to be a big effort in the coming years once SpaceX reels off more Starship tests and understands the system more. It becomes more reliable to either shrink the area that is evacuated during a launch and or shorten the amount of time that those other nearby launch facilities will need to be evacuated. But I think that's going to be many dozens of flights down the road once the range safety officials there have the confidence to take those steps to lessen the impact of Starship operations on the neighbors there at Kennedy Space Center and Cape Canaveral Space Force Station.
Yeah, and just taking a closer look at this launch as compared to where the 39 press site is here at the Kennedy Space Center, it looks like we are just past the edge of that orange barrier there. So assuming things don't change between now and the first flights of Starship, and heaven forbid they were to expand this, it looks like we'll be able to be present for those inaugural launches of this massive launch vehicle, which is certainly going to be quite the exciting thing to see for all of the local and certainly national and international media that no doubt will descend upon the Space Coast for that. It'll be probably something akin to the first Falcon Heavy launch that we saw, where traffic was backed up for hours after that double landing the first time that happened here on the Space Coast, as I'm sure you, Stephen, very well remember.
Yes, I was there for that launch back in 2018, and I think that was obviously one of perhaps SpaceX's most important launch in its history, alongside Demo 2, the first crew mission, and maybe the first Starship test flight here. Although I would argue, as we get deeper into the Starship program, the expectations for Starship are getting higher. The first flight back in April 2023 made it farther than a lot of people expected, and even Elon Musk himself, mentioned ahead of the launch that the goal was not to destroy the launch pad. Of course, they damaged some of the launch ground infrastructure when it launched, but the launch pad was intact. And by most measures, I think that first flight can be counted as exceeding expectations for a lot of people. But as we're here at Flight 10, and SpaceX, this is obviously still a test program, but as Starship evolves and they need to attempt different tests with the heat shield, with in-orbit refueling, I think the expectation soon, if not already, is the thing is going to make it to space. And as they try these things for the first time, such as in-orbit refueling, if things don't go as planned, that is to be expected. But the launch portion, I think, would be expected to be more reliable. But we haven't seen that so far this year, and I think today is the chance to hopefully get those gremlins behind them in terms of from SpaceX's perspective, and to move forward with these other tests that they need to execute on to really unlock Starship's real potential for going to the moon and Mars.
Yeah, it seems as though, just given from the outside, from the layman's point of view, issues that if you're just watching the flight program, seem to be very repetitious, and that the ship just is not performing as expected. Obviously, you and I and our viewers are a little bit more in tune with the finer details of the Starship program and know that there have been improvements along the way. But when you zoom out to a macro level, there really hasn't been really strong, tangible progress on the Block 2 upper stage in the way that I think a lot of folks would have expected by now. And as you said, today is a good opportunity to quell some of those concerns and show that, SpaceX is ready to be on the cusp of getting to Block 3 and not, having to make some massive improvements in the next Block 2 flight before they get to Block 3. It would be obviously better if it was more of a smoother gradient up to that next version of Starship than having to stair step in pretty aggressive ways, I would think.
I think that's a perfect assessment, Will. I think anything less than getting at least 2 reentry uh, on target would be a setback for SpaceX at this point with Starship. They really are hungry to get the data on the heat shield. They're trying several different designs of thermal protection tiles on this vehicle. They've had those in every flight this year, but they have not gotten the ship to reentry to test the performance of those tiles. And I think at least getting to the start of reentry, so they have some real flight data to anchor their models, their computer models, as they proceed into the design or development of version 3 and future iterations of Starship, so they know, are they on the right track with the way the heat shield is designed, or do they need to make changes? Those are questions that version 2 was supposed to help answer. It hasn't yet, but hopefully today we'll get some data to help guide the engineers on whether their thinking for the heat shield design on version 3 is correct, or if they need to make more changes. I think the booster, knock on wood, has been a pretty resounding success throughout the Starship test program. It's been a while since we've had any engine failures on ascent, at least with the booster, and we've seen 3 catches of the booster at the tower here at Starbase. I was here for the first of those. It was one of the most incredible things I've ever seen in person. Unfortunately, today won't have a catch attempt, but they're going to be testing the booster in kind of more extreme conditions offshore to see if it's resilient against an engine failure during the landing burn, things like that. They want to test that off the coast over the ocean before they do it over land to make sure that since it'll be a slightly higher risk reentry and landing than it would be just coming back with all the engines running, all the engines operating as planned. So we won't see the catch today, but the booster, again, the Super Heavy, has been pretty reliable overall. Since the first couple of flights, it had some issues, but with catches and on the most recent flight in May, I think it was overshadowed by the failure of the upper stage, but the booster on the flight in May was reused from a previous Starship launch. That was the first time SpaceX did that with the Super Heavy booster. So still some steps forward this year, but I think the big focus right now is getting the ship in working order as they move forward with these more ambitious tests, like with the heat shield and refueling, like we talked about a minute ago.
Yeah, and on that flight, it shouldn't be overlooked as well that also featured not only a booster that was flying 29 out of 33 previously flown engines, in addition to the rest of the booster hardware itself, but one of those engines, number 314, which has the little pi icon around it, was flying for a 3rd time. So, SpaceX is getting some really important reuse data on the booster, as you said, but the ship certainly is the sticking point. I wonder, in your mind, just going back to your point about the heat shield, while certainly going through proper reentry would give them data that they can't replicate in any terrestrial tests, how much of a gap do you think there is between what they can do on the ground in places like White Sands or Marshall Space Flight Center with heat shield tile testing? In your mind, how big is the gulf between what they can do on the ground and what they have gotten on orbit and what they hope to get on orbit with these newer tiles? I guess, to maybe ask in a different way, why not just put a lot of emphasis on testing those novel tiles on the ground and then slapping a whole bunch of them on the Flight 11 Starship and seeing where it goes from there?
Good questions, Will. I'm not an expert in thermodynamics or fluid dynamics, so I'll do my best here. But
No
first of
pressure.
all, I'll note I'll note that the approach that SpaceX takes with all of its programs is testing, 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 flight testing. We've seen that with Falcon 9, with the initial Grasshopper flights to get to the point where they're able to recover the booster and reuse it on Falcon 9. We're seeing it with Starship now with flight tests of different engine configurations, different block versions, Block 1, Block 2, Block 3. So SpaceX's emphasis is really on iterative design, build, test, fly, fix, fly again, basically. And the other thing I'll note is just the scale of Starship. The ship itself is, I think, more than 15 stories tall. It's 30 feet in diameter. It won't fit in any existing, high temperature wind tunnel in at least the United States. I think the world, for that matter. I think the biggest ones are in the United States, and so you can't test the entire vehicle in the conditions with the aero loading, with the heat loading that it'll see in reentry. You can't test the entire vehicle at those conditions. You can take a coupon or a section of tiles to fit into a terrestrial wind tunnel or thermo or a high temperature tunnel and do the testing there, or in an ArcJet facility, you can test individual tiles in a facility like that, but you can't test the whole vehicle except in the relevant environment of space, or in this case, the atmosphere as it's coming back to Earth.
And he says he's not an expert. Please. No, I think that was a good summation of why SpaceX is doing things in the manner in which they are doing. And of course, like you said, there's no experience like flight experience, and SpaceX's whole model is really centered around iterative testing in a not just a flight-like environment, but in that flight environment. So as often as it can, it wants to launch, learn, apply, and then launch again as quickly as possible. Speaking of quickly as possible, we're 1 hour, 32 minutes, 10 seconds and counting from the opening of today's launch window. Barring SpaceX making a further adjustment to its TZ at this point in time, we are roughly 15 minutes away from the point in which the SpaceX launch director will make the call on the start of propellant load for today's operation, with the fueling getting underway at T-minus 53 minutes, starting with the ship's fuel, that is liquid methane, and then moving to the ship upper stage's liquid oxygen tank, T-minus 45 minutes and 20 seconds. One of the fringe benefits, of course, of a scrub, especially when the broadcast can go through the full paces, is that we do get some additional nuggets, some visual nuggets that we had not seen before. One of those was getting an updated animation of what it will look like when SpaceX is able to start deploying its Starlink version 3 satellites. We'll go to this video now, which shows the newest version of ship in low Earth orbit deploying, again, the operational Starlinks from the Pez dispenser door that you see here. Generally speaking, very similar to the animation that we saw before with the Block 1 version of ship, but Stephen, certainly nice to get an update from SpaceX on this important operation, not just for the Starship program, but certainly one of the big revenue generators for SpaceX is its Starlink constellation. Your thoughts on this updated animation, and how important it is for SpaceX to get this from render to reality?
Yeah, obviously Starlink is a key revenue generator for SpaceX, and Starship is really the only vehicle capable of flying the third generation Starlink satellite bus. And so there are 8 of those Starlink bus simulators on board the ship this afternoon, and hopefully we'll see those deploy in space. Um, I, I view that as kind of a secondary objective, ranking a little below the heat shield data that they're really eager to get. However, if they get to the Starlink deployment test, that'll be something we've never seen before, and it'll be a new video, and it could be one of the video highlights of this flight. If the ship gets to that point, the door opens, and they're able to pop these things out in space and get some good video. That can't wait to see it.
And besides just having these larger and I have to imagine more capable Starlinks on orbit, as you sort of see how SpaceX has proven successful with its Starlink program to date, and we saw another video separate from this talking about the manufacture and milestones of the Starlink program during the broadcast yesterday. In your mind, why do you think it's so important for SpaceX to be able to move to this version 3 edition of Starlink when it seems to be doing pretty darn well with the version 2 minis that it's able to launch on its Falcon 9 rockets quite readily from both the east and west coasts?
I don't know exactly what capabilities version 3 of Starlink will bring online. However, I have to imagine we know they'll be larger and more massive, and I have to imagine in particular for things like direct to cell, where the receiver on the ground is quite small. You have a very small antenna trying to receive a signal from space, a couple hundred miles above you. The more powerful the signal is coming from space, the more data theoretically you can get to a consumer smartphone. So I think that's one big thing that Starlink version 3 could really open, because right now with these version 2 minis, the direct to cell, it's a great capability, but it's really bandwidth limited.
Yeah, that's very true. It'll also be interesting to see once the version 3 satellites start to be deployed how the astronomy community here on Earth feels about those satellites and the glare that they could present and impact in terrestrial observations of the night sky. I think that's going to be certainly something to watch. Obviously, there's been some consternation about larger satellites like AST Space Mobile's Bluebird constellation and some of its other large satellites. So obviously that's a bit of a future problem, but once Starship is operational, I have to imagine that the first launches of the V3 Starlinks won't be too far behind.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's something we haven't really heard a lot about recently. I think Space News had a story today or yesterday about the brightness of the mega constellations, not just Starlink, but also you mentioned AST, also Kuiper and the Chinese mega constellations, which we don't really know a lot about their designs. We don't know what missions they're doing, first of all, really, much less what materials they're made of to make them less reflective of sunlight. I'm kind of curious, just as an academic exercise, how bright a Starship will be in low Earth orbit from the ground. I imagine it could outshine the ISS, but just don't know for sure.
Yeah, that'll be something interesting to see. I hadn't really thought about the reflection of just the Starship itself. I suppose we'll get a really good assessment of that once we see the tanker go up on orbit, something that's going to hang out in low Earth orbit a lot longer than a typical Starship will.
Yeah, exactly. And seeing the two ships come together and dock for the propellant transfer demo will be really fascinating as well. And depending on the exact orbit they're in and the time of day and stuff, might be able to see them actually rendezvousing with one another from the ground.
Well, speaking of lingering questions that we still have, one of the things that did come out of yesterday's briefing, yesterday's broadcast, was the technical talk of Starship, which we did hear a little bit from Elon Musk and the Starship chief engineer. We talked a little bit about it in the immediate aftermath, but of course we were getting right up into the final big milestones of fueling. So now that you've had some time to digest the comments from yesterday, Stephen, what were your main impressions from what we heard? And obviously, still plenty of things left that we want to know, but what were the main takeaways that you had from what we did get from that talk?
There wasn't a whole lot new for those of us who have closely following the Starship program. Wasn't a whole lot new from Elon Musk or from Bill Riley, the VP of Starship Engineering, during that discussion yesterday. But a couple of things stood out, just kind of underscoring things we already knew. Elon Musk mentioned the heat shield of Starship and how that's really going to be the definitive so-called acid test for the success of Starship in terms of it becoming rapidly reusable. They need a heat shield that's going to come back to Earth intact in one piece. It's not smashed up, doesn't have missing tiles or anything. They need to be able to catch it, put it back on a booster, and launch it again very quickly. No need to refurbish. That's the goal. So he really underscored that, as well as one thing that stood out to me is something he didn't mention. Of course, he wasn't asked this. It was on a SpaceX official live stream, not in the Spaces format on X as it was originally supposed to be. So people like us didn't get a chance to ask him questions that we want answered. But in the SpaceX live stream, no mention of the moon whatsoever. He mentioned Mars, I think, at least 13 times. I counted it up, but no mention of the moon. And again, based on some of his comments earlier this year about the NASA Artemis program, not a big surprise, but just shows kind of a widening disconnect in my view between the goals of SpaceX and the NASA government space program, which has geopolitical goals associated with it, such as beating China to the moon and establishing a base on the moon, whereas Elon Musk's goals are really about making humans multiplanetary, a multiplanetary species, and to do that, his idea is to go to Mars.
Yeah, certainly. While wearing a Nuke Mars T-shirt, Mars is definitely the thing that is the center of Musk's universe at this point in time. I think the only real mention of the moon between the talk in May that was pre-recorded and posted to X after the fact, and what we heard yesterday is passing reference to Moon Base Alpha as a future possible permanent name for a human moon settlement. But really, that's it. No use of the term Artemis program, which, like I said, creates an interesting separation between what we've been hearing as recently as I think there was a cabinet meeting just earlier today in which the current acting NASA administrator, Sean Duffy, re-emphasized NASA's intention to return humans to the surface of the moon for an ongoing presence, but not hearing a whole lot from the company that's actually going to be bringing humans down to the surface of the moon, which is notable. Speaking of notable, taking a closer look at the center of the tower, you can see the venting from the tower is just now really starting to pick up as SpaceX is thermally conditioning the feed lines there along the launch and catch tower ahead of fueling its ship upper stage. That venting will only increase over the next several minutes as teams prepare to load both liquid methane and liquid oxygen on board the ship upper stage. The venting, though, connected to the LOX line, not the methane line. Just about an hour, 20 minutes away from the opening of the window. And just as a reminder for folks that are joining the stream now or have just recently joined the stream, SpaceX will begin its fueling campaign with liquid methane at the T-minus 53-minute mark, followed about 8 minutes later by liquid oxygen. Going back to our conversation, Stephen, a little bit earlier about the booster itself that has, been overshadowed this year by talk of the ship's problems. has been fairly successful, but they're, I believe, in Flight 9 and I think as well in Flight 8, while there weren't any engines out on ascent, there were only 13 out of, or 12 out of the 13 planned boost back engines that relit, and SpaceX has noted the reasoning behind that. But has that surprised you that for these last few missions that we've also not seen a perfectly nominal boost back burn, given that SpaceX has had now several times to make attempts to get this perfectly right and smooth out some of those issues?
Not really, Will. I think we need to face the reality that this is still a test program, and little things, quote unquote, little things like that would not be entirely unexpected to happen on any of those flights or this flight for that matter. Um, I think the real bigger challenge is getting things right with the ship and having one or two engines fail on the Super Heavy booster, especially during the return. Not ideal, things to be learned and improved upon, but we're only on Flight 10. Wouldn't be shocking for that to happen again today, in my opinion. But I think the real focus is getting the ship right.
I think that is a fair point. There's a lot more, I suppose, new things in regard to the ship than there are or will be with the booster. Of course, eventually we'll see the debut of the Raptor 3 engines in the next iteration of the Super Heavy booster, which will be quite exciting and certainly a different look for the booster, given that it won't require as much additional shielding as we're used to seeing on the booster at this point in time.
Exactly. Yeah, can't wait to see version 3, and we really don't know a whole lot about what changes are coming with version 3, other than we know it's going to be the version that will be capable of in-space refueling, but we don't know, other than, and we know the changes in dimensions. We know it's a little taller and things like that, and but we don't know exactly what changes are made to the heat shield or the plumbing or anything like that, or the propulsion system for version 3. And then now we're more recently hearing Elon Musk tease a version 4 with a Starship that's much bigger, with 9 engines instead of 6 on the ship. And he says that in a post on X, I think overnight, said that is scheduled to debut around 2027.
Yeah, and I think that'll be supported by, what do you say, a booster with 35 engines. I know the new total number was going to be 42, which is, of course, something he keyed into during the last company talk.
Yeah, I can't remember what the changes are to the booster number of engines, if any. But I know 9 on the ship.
That'll certainly be something to see. Well, we are just about an hour and 16 and a half minutes away from the opening of the launch window, which means we are getting right up to the point at which SpaceX should be making the call on the start of prop load. So keep an eye out, and we will update you if, in fact, SpaceX is ready to start tanking this rocket, or if we're going to be looking at a new T0. As a refresher for folks who were maybe not with us during the first couple of launch attempts, while T-minus 1 hour and 15 minutes is the stated time in which the go for prop load call is determined one way or the other, we usually didn't get an update if the T0 needed to change until closer to the 1 hour mark. So don't be surprised if there's not news on that front in the next minute or so. It might take a little bit longer before we get to that point. As we're awaiting news on the start of fueling, do want to take a quick peek at our live chat here. First off, want to thank the 4,000 plus of you for watching along with us live. Be sure to hit that like button beneath the video and share the stream if you haven't already, to help bring more folks into this live launch coverage as we roll along through the count. Also want to thank Wonder Dog for a $5 super chat. Thank you, Wonder Dog. Thanks as well to The Lost Spark Art and Photography Studio for gifting 5 Spaceflight Now memberships, along with Daniel H. So to our 10 newest channel members, welcome aboard. Glad to have you with us. Want to just let folks know that the clock that you saw there on your screen, that was a glitch, not an indication of the status of the mission. We're making a quick fix to that, and we'll have the countdown clock back up here in just a moment. Time currently stands at T-minus 1 hour, 14 minutes, 3 seconds, and counting. Back to the live chat for just a moment. Want to also thank channel member Alan Gable for a $10 super chat. Thank you, Alan. Alan says simply, go Starship. Well, Stephen, as we're awaiting the start of fueling on this Starship rocket, obviously this is the star du jour of the suborbital space world right now, but obviously there's plenty going on our beat. What else is kind of occupying your reporter's notepad at this point in time outside of the comings and goings of Starship? What's kind of been piquing your interest these days?
Yeah, good question, Will. One thing I've been really focusing on for the last 12 months or so has been military space and national security space, particularly with the really remarkable advancements of China in space with military satellites, and most of which we really don't know what they're up to in space. We've seen 2 Chinese satellites docked together in geosynchronous orbit, presumably for a refueling mission, a refueling test, which we haven't heard any outcome from that. But at last check, their satellites are still docked together, and no other country, no one has refueled a satellite in geosynchronous orbit before. So that's interesting. Of course, also following the other commercial up and comers in the space business, particularly companies like Firefly and Stoke Space and Relativity, and seeing how those companies develop. And then another one that I know you are very familiar with, United Launch Alliance and their Vulcan rocket, as they really have a very deep backlog of missions for the U.S. Space Force and Amazon that their customers are really, really chomping at the bit for them to launch. And seeing how quickly ULA can ramp up the launch rate of Vulcan to meet that backlog, which I think is more than 70 missions, if I recall, between the Space Force and Amazon that are booked to launch on Vulcan.
Yeah, it'll certainly be helpful for ULA to get their pad out at Vandenberg Space Force Base up and running, which, as of the last update from ULA President and CEO Tori Bruno, before the launch of USSF 106 from here in Florida, said it was about 73% finished and had some struggles due to availability of contractors and some material supplies, but that a lot of that has been rectified, but playing catch up has been challenging, to say the least, and it'll be largely up to the Space Force's timeline of things when they're going to really get going into a mode of using that pad, since it sounds like the great majority, if not all of the Kuiper missions that are on Vulcan, I should say, will be launching from here in Florida. Certainly all of the Atlas V missions will launch from here in Florida, since the pad that they used to use out in Vandenberg is now Vulcan exclusive.
Yeah, that's a good point, Will. I don't know the answer to this, but I've wondered, could ULA offload some of their Kuiper missions to launch from the West Coast if they have, obviously United Launch Alliance, most of their launches will be from Cape Canaveral, because most of their launches will be going to orbits that are only accessible from the Cape. But if they have a long lull of no launches for the Space Force from the West Coast, from Vandenberg Space Force Base, could they move a couple of Kuiper missions off Vulcan to launch off Vulcan from Vandenberg. I believe the orbit might be accessible from Vandenberg at a 53-degree inclination because we've seen SpaceX launch Starlink satellites to a similar orbital inclination from Vandenberg, flying off to the southeast, kind of hugging the coastline to avoid flying over populated areas. Could be something ULA looks into going forward, but I don't know the answer to that for sure. Maybe you have some more insight on that.
I wish I could say the answer to that is I do. I do not, but I do believe a number of the Kuiper constellation satellites may operate in a polar orbit, so that would certainly be enticing to Amazon to launch those from the west coast. But we'll have to wait and see. Those certainly don't seem to be the initial main priority for the constellation. Was just looking, and the next launch for ULA will be Kuiper satellite launch on an Atlas V rocket, which will launch in the 551 configuration from Slick 41 here in Florida. No announced date for that just yet, but that will be coming up here in the likely not too distant future.
Good point about the polar orbit. They'll need satellites in polar orbit to have global coverage eventually for Kuiper. And of course, but we know Amazon has made a big investments at Cape Canaveral with the construction of its dedicated payload processing facility and helping fund United Launch Alliance's expansion to build a second vertical integration facility there at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. So, obviously Amazon really sees the Cape as really one of their nerve centers, more so than the West Coast.
Yeah, without having their own dedicated satellite processing facility in Vandenberg, I would think they would face quite a bottleneck having to go through Astrotech and their, understandably limited space that they have available there, not only for customer missions, for, non-government operations, but certainly taking precedence are the national security payloads that have to fly out of Vandenberg, things like the proliferated architecture for the National Reconnaissance Office that we saw, what was that, 5 missions at the beginning of the year? There were quite a few of them, fairly rapid succession for the NRO.
Yeah, there were quite a few. I can't remember the number of launches, but somewhere close to 200 satellites in total that launched into the NRO's proliferated constellation. And we've heard from several Space Force folks in recent months that they view payload
Oh, I think we lost you there for a second, Stephen. You still with us?
Yeah, Will, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now. Before you continue, though, we do have a go for prop load from SpaceX. Weather is now 55% favorable for liftoff at the opening of the window. So it sounds like they're going to try right at their first opportunity. Just as a reminder for folks, SpaceX does, once fueling has begun, have the option to hold the count at T-minus 40 seconds for several minutes, but it does limit them a bit once fueling is underway, since they need to keep the super cold propellants at the right temperature. And of course, in southern Texas, it's nowhere near as cold as the propellant that's going to be on board this Starship rocket in the very near future. So a little bit of latitude there, but not a whole heck of a lot once tanking has begun. But Stephen, go ahead, back to your point.
Yeah, we were just talking about payload processing, and I was just mentioning that we've heard from several Space Force officials in the last few months that they're now starting to view payload processing facilities as bottlenecks to ramping up launch cadences for a number of launch companies, both at Cape Canaveral and at Vandenberg Space Force Base. So, that's a good point you bring up about having a limited number or finite number of slots available in some of these commercial payload processing facilities. And probably one of the real reasons why Amazon spent the money to build their own dedicated facility at Kennedy Space Center.
Undoubtedly. And we've been talking quite a bit about ULA and the missions ahead for them for the Kuiper constellation, but left out of that conversation, but certainly not out of the broader discussion, are both Blue Origin with its New Glenn rocket and Arianespace with its Ariane 6 rocket, which between the two are on contract to launch more than 30 flights for the Kuiper constellation. And as of right now, it's super unclear when either of them is going to step up to the plate with our first batch of Kuiper satellites. For New Glenn, next up is the launch of NASA's Escapade mission, a pair of Mars-bound satellites with science payloads from University of California, Berkeley. And that's set to launch at the, actually just about 1 month from today, on September 29th is when that first, or that next launch opportunity is for them. You know, and then it's a little bit more opaque as far as Blue's schedule. They haven't really talked about what lies ahead for them. Meanwhile, Arianespace has launched just a trio of missions using their new heavy lift rocket, but we also have not heard from that company, you know, where in their roster of missions that is still on deck, where the Kuiper constellation may fall, since principally they want to get European payloads into orbit, and that is what they're going to be most heavily focused on, you know, right at the get-go.
Exactly. I think that's, you know, a reason why we saw Amazon purchase 3 launches on SpaceX's Falcon 9 to help fast track the path for their satellites to actually get to orbit with these other rockets. You know, having delays and issues increasing their launch cadence after they do debut, because really only the Atlas V and Falcon 9 have proven they can launch even on a monthly cadence. You know, Atlas V has proven it can launch about once per month from the Cape, and obviously SpaceX much faster cadence with Falcon 9, but none of the other rockets have shown they can launch more than a couple of times in a 12-month period. So there's a lot of work to do for Vulcan, for Ariane 6, for Blue Origin to ramp up their cadence. I think Vulcan's probably the closest to doing so at this point. But because we don't expect the second flight of Blue Origin's New Glenn rocket until later this year, and unknown if we'll have more than one flight of New Glenn before the end of the year, or if Flight 3 is probably more likely going to be in 2026. And we don't know the payload for that. At least I can't recall off the top of my head if that's been announced, the payload for Flight 3 of New Glenn, but I don't think it's Kuiper. And as far as Ariane 6, they have flown 3 times now, as you mentioned, and my understanding is for Ariane 6 to be able to accommodate Kuiper missions, there has to be there's an upgrade that Ariane Group and Arianespace has to do on the upper stage, I believe, of Ariane 6 to be able to accommodate those Kuiper satellites, the heavy load of Kuiper satellites, full complement of Kuiper satellites, I should say, to be deployed on an Ariane 6. So I think that's still a few missions down the line as well.
Yeah, I was actually just referring back to the reporting of your colleague Eric Berger there at Ars Technica, and from his reporting, the third flight of New Glenn will be for Firefly's Elytra orbital transfer vehicle, and then that'll be followed by Blue Moon Mark 1 as a precursor for the Artemis program, and then sometime in mid-2026 would be its first Kuiper launch. So that's quite deep into the campaign for Amazon, and while I have to imagine they are already filing the paperwork for an extension of the terms connected to the Federal Communications Commission to have half of their 3,200 plus satellites on orbit and in working order, that they are filing for an extension to that deadline. You know, they're going to fall quite dramatically below that number, even with, you know, Vulcan starting to ramp up in cadence, and ULA aiming to have their twice-a-month cadence established by the end of the year with Vulcan, and, you know, Atlas in the mix with their remaining, 6 Atlas launches that Amazon still has? Yeah, 6 launches. You know, they're still going to be quite short of that. I wonder if, you know, Amazon investors pushed their company to get 3 flights on a Falcon 9 rocket the first time. I wonder if something similar may be called upon in order to get things going a little bit faster now, or maybe if they don't mind an extension because they need more time to ramp up their satellite manufacturing cadence. It's a little unclear. Amazon doesn't talk a lot to the public about what's going on behind the scenes.
Right, good question. I think my answer to that would be more likely than not that Amazon will buy more Falcon 9 launches for Kuiper over the next few months to 12 months, maybe, until at least Vulcan and maybe one of the other launch vehicles can really show that they're going to be able to pick up the pace. So I'd be surprised if Amazon didn't purchase more Falcon 9 launches, let's say in the next 6 months or so. I think there's, of those three, they've launched two, correct? So there's one more to go on Falcon on the current contract, and I suspect there'll be a few more.
Yeah, that would be probably a very good assumption there. Well, in the realm of things we don't have to assume, we are currently less than 59 minutes to go on the Starship rocket countdown. And in less than 6 minutes, that's when SpaceX will start loading fuel on board the ship upper stage. Got the camera zoomed in. This view coming from our friends at Lab Padre. This is the quick disconnect series of tubes and feed lines that lead from the launch and catch tower to the ship upper stage, part of which will be the fuel line for the liquid methane as well as for liquid oxygen. That'll be starting to tank on the upper stage at about T-minus 45 minutes and 20 seconds. Time now T-minus 55 minutes, 7 seconds and counting. As SpaceX nears the start of fueling, you can see the vent from the tower has largely subsided, indicating that the feed lines have reached their optimal thermal temperature and are ready to receive liquid oxygen and liquid methane. As we're on the cusp of fueling the Starship rocket, or seeing the start of fueling, let's go ahead and talk about the countdown timeline. These are the milestones still ahead for SpaceX as it prepares to hopefully launch its Starship on the 10th test flight for this integrated launch campaign. The go-ahead for prop load was given at the T-minus 1 hour 15 minute mark. Coming up here in just about 1 minute is when liquid methane will start to flow on board Ship 37, the upper stage of this Starship Super Heavy booster stack. That'll be followed at the T-minus 45 minute 20-second mark by the loading beginning for liquid oxygen on board the ship upper stage. T-minus 41 minutes and 37 seconds is when booster fuel load will get underway, followed minutes later by liquid oxygen on the Super Heavy booster. Tail number booster 16. Just under 20 minutes before flight, the Raptor chill down will begin. SpaceX thermally conditioning the 33 Raptor engines at the base of the Super Heavy booster, as well as the engines on the ship upper stage ahead of flight. Moving right along on the fueling timeline at T-minus 3 minutes and 20 seconds is when ship prop load is expected to be complete. Same will be true on the booster about 30 seconds afterwards. T-minus 30 seconds is when the SpaceX flight director will give their go for launch call. The flame deflector will be activated about 10 seconds before takeoff. And the Raptor engine ignition sequence begins at T-minus 3 seconds. If everything is moving along as expected, we'll hit T0, followed shortly thereafter by the liftoff of the Starship Super Heavy stack. Looking right through the cloud of the venting kicking back up pretty aggressively there from the launch tower. We're now T-minus 49 minutes and counting ahead of the flight of Starship Flight 10. We're just a couple minutes away now from the start of liquid oxygen expected to flow on board the ship upper stage, set to begin at T-minus 45 minutes and 20 seconds. As we are awaiting the start of LOX load on the ship upper stage, we should be getting views from SpaceX here momentarily. Want to thank Super Tech Boy for a $2 super chat. Appreciate that. And Super Tech Boy asks, is NASA using SpaceX propulsion for the ISS orbit? They are partially going to be doing that. The cargo Dragon vehicle that just docked to the International Space Station on Monday is going to be performing about 5 or 6 orbital boosts of the station, which will be the predominant boosting for its time on orbit. And that's in coordination with its plans for the end of Starship, or the end of the ISS life. Now getting a look inside mission control there at Starbase, their new mission control design. SpaceX's Dan Hewitt says they're still monitoring the weather as they get closer to liftoff in about 45.5 minutes. But looking better today than yesterday, as we heard from our friend Stephen Clark with Ars Technica. Just under 45 minutes, 20 seconds to liftoff. At this point, liquid oxygen should now be flowing on board the ship upper stage, alongside liquid methane that began at the 53-minute mark. With SpaceX targeting the opening of the window, they do have a handful of minutes to hold the countdown at T-minus 40 seconds if that comes to that. For those who are just joining us and were not here for either of our first two launch attempts, want to let folks know, just to set expectations, SpaceX will not be performing a booster catch attempt. Instead, they are going to be performing a controlled landing in the Gulf and are going to be performing an off-nominal landing scenario intentionally by using just 2 out of the 3 center engines. Let's see if I've got a graphic here for this I can pull up. The booster will use 2 of the 3 center engines, as you can see in the upper right-hand corner of this graphic, and then pull in the use of 1 of the middle engines to help compensate. The idea for this experiment is to demonstrate that the Super Heavy booster can perform a safe landing back at the launch tower in the event that one of those center engines unintentionally goes out, that they can still retrieve the booster and not have to divert it for an offshore landing and destruction. I want to thank graphic artist Vikram Tajana for lending us this graphic and some others that we may be using throughout the course of the broadcast to help illustrate the milestones ahead for SpaceX and its Flight 10 mission today. Coming up in now less than a minute is when the Super Heavy booster's fuel load is set to begin. Liquid methane will start to flow on board that massive booster with 33 Raptor engines at the base. Just a quick bit of housekeeping here as well. As you see these views from SpaceX, you know, the clock in the upper left-hand corner of the big box there versus our clock in the upper right-hand corner of the screen. Our clock is right now in real time, and what's coming in from SpaceX is coming in on just a slight delay. We've done some work behind the scenes to minimize that as much as we possibly can at this point, but that's the reason for the slight discrepancy. This is the ring that SpaceX was able to add as an adapter that allowed them to perform static fires of Ship 37 here at the orbital launch mount instead of where they would normally do testing of the ship at their Massey's test site. However, there was an anomaly with Ship 36 during the fueling campaign for the 6-engine static fire that caused it to explode and damaged quite a bit of equipment there. SpaceX commentators note that they are getting Massey's back up into an operational mode and are preparing it for use with the version 3 edition of the ship upper stage, which at one point expected to debut in the back half of 2025. We'll see, based off of how things go today and with the final launch of a Block 2 ship, if that's still in the cards. Time now T minus 38 minutes, 41 seconds and counting. We're less than 3 minutes away from the start of booster lock load beginning. We are starting to see a frost line form there on the Super Heavy booster as the fueling has been underway for the last couple of minutes. As SpaceX is continuing to keep weather as a watch item, let's go ahead and take a look back now at the latest cycle from the GOES East satellite, taking a look at the skies over Starbase, Texas. You can see some clouds bubbling up to the north and a little bit to the west, some off the coastline as well. As SpaceX was coming on air, they noted that weather was 55% favorable for liftoff at the opening of the window. So we will keep our eyes open and paying attention to the weather forecast and let you know if there are any prominent changes in the course of the next 37.5 minutes. Taking a look at our live chat, want to thank the more than 10,000 of you who are watching along with us live this Tuesday evening now. If you haven't already, you could do us a big favor just by clicking that like button and sharing the stream, allowing some more folks to find their way into this live launch coverage. Also want to thank Christopher Lemke for a $5 super chat. Thank you, Chris. And thanks to one of our channel members and moderators, Jeff Hansen, for a $10 super chat. Jeff says, go Starbase, go SpaceX, go Starship 10, Godspeed, Ship 37, and Booster 16. Now T minus 35 minutes, 25 seconds and counting. At this point, booster LOX load should be underway. As you can see from this point of view on the Starship rocket, quite a bit of blue sky over the pad there. And going back to the view from South Padre Island, you can see there are some clouds to the north of the pad in between this camera and the launch pad, but you can also see sort of the shadows of where the clouds are lying, and it looks pretty clear out over the launch site itself. A couple boats out in the water, hoping to get a good view of ship and Super Heavy booster once they make their joint descent off of Pad A, coming up in just about half an hour from now. Time now T minus 33 minutes, 40 seconds and counting. For those of you who are with us for our coverage of the NAUS mission from Vandenberg Space Force Base earlier today, launching a Falcon 9 rocket with multiple payloads on board, we have heard that multiple of the customers whose payloads were flying have been able to successfully make contact with their satellites now in orbit. That includes Planet, an Earth observation company whose CEO, Will Marshall, says they were successful in making contact with both of their satellites. Also, Pixel was able to contact all three of its Firefly satellites, deploy its solar panels, and all systems are nominal. So congratulations to those satellite providers for a successful kickoff to their respective missions. Time now T minus 28 minutes, 51 seconds and counting. We're just about 10 minutes away, a little less than 10 minutes from the next milestone on the route to Flight 10. And that is the chill down of the Raptor engines on both the Super Heavy booster as well as the ship upper stage. You can see just by looking at the rocket that tanking is moving along quite well, with the frost lines starting to build up on the LOX and liquid methane tanks for both stages of this two-stage rocket. Also want to thank a few folks in the live chat. Thanks to channel member Chuck Close for a very generous $25 super chat. Thank you, Chuck. Good to see you this evening. And thanks to Grok's Therapist. It's a great handle. Also with a very generous $20 super chat. Grok's Therapist says, thanks for all you guys do. You're an amazing channel. Well, that's very kind of you to say. We really appreciate those words. Well, as we're waiting for our next milestone coming up on the ship, again with that Raptor engine chill, want to go back to some comments that we were able to capture during the Space Coast Symposium and Expo that happened this past Friday here in Cape Canaveral. SpaceX Vice President of Launch Kiko Donchev joined the event for a fireside chat to talk about a lot of different things concerning SpaceX, Falcon 9, human space flight, and the Starlink programs, of course. Most notable among those for our purposes today, of course, are its Starship plans, and getting a little too close to the thick of things to show you the entirety of all of his Starship comments, but want to key in on a particular section of those where Kiko talks about the development and the future of Starship, not only for here in Florida, but also for its role in the Artemis program.
The bulk of the development of Starship is happening in South Texas, in Brownsville, Texas. We have a town called Starbase there. The first really ever orbital commercial spaceport is there. That's where all of our test flights have happened, just the ship test flights and now our orbital test flights. But as we stabilize that rocket, we're going to operationalize it, and we're going to bring it to Florida. So we're working on two separate environmental impact statements, sort of huge environmental studies, both at KSC for using Starship out of 39A, and on the Space Force side at 37, which is the former Delta Heavy pad. So we've gone through a very lengthy process. It's actually been, there's some thought like we're just kind of rushing into the Starship in Florida thing, but we've actually been working on this problem for maybe 6 or 7 years now. And I see Janet's in the room here. We stopped and started and stopped and started, and through our partnership with both NASA and the Space Force, we cut no corners. We're doing the long environmental studies, and we're making sure that when we bring this rocket here, we're ready in a way that is helpful to the community and to the other operators. There is some fear. Oh my God, Starship is going to shut down everything else that's happening at the Cape. That's not true. Sure, is it a big rocket? Yes, it's bigger than Falcon 9, bigger than Falcon Heavy. Actually, it's the world's biggest rocket ever built. But we've done a lot of work to basically figure out how we shrink the impact. SpaceX believes that the best spaceport is a spaceport that and not saying it will happen like this, but that multiple launch providers could launch multiple times a day. We want to help the DoD and KSC design a spaceport where, it's not just SpaceX, right? We want Blue Origin, we want Relativity, we want ULA, we want all these new entrants, we want Stoke to come in and be prosperous and be successful. And fundamentally, the spaceport is capable of handling that. Physics says it is. It's just how do we figure out how we work together and how we deconflict, and then actually go do some hard math and some hard engineering to make that happen. I think we've got a really good plan. I think we've got a really good plan working with our partners, and it's going to be very, very exciting to watch the first launch of Starship from Florida.
It will be. And I think it's also exciting from the NASA perspective what this will bring to the Artemis program as well, and landing eventually our astronauts on the surface of the moon.
Yeah, HLS is a huge, the human landing system, right, is a huge priority of ours. We got to help NASA achieve that goal of landing on the surface of the moon, right? So we're on contract to basically do a transfer of the astronauts from Orion, once it's in lunar orbit, to a Starship, and then use the ship to actually go land on the surface of the moon. That tech will be really important and key, and same stuff that it's going to take to achieve that goal is also going to enable the Mars goals, right? The big leap is you got to refuel on orbit, right? So this idea that you'll launch a ship, and then you'll launch another ship, and then you aggregate propellant, right? And that lets you get enough energy to then move a ship, do the entire landing sequence. But over time, that same exact architecture is like the needed game changer for actually sending a ton of stuff to Mars and being able to not just land, a rover, but land like 1,000 tons, 100, many tons to the surface of Mars.
Time now T-minus 22 minutes and counting. We're closing in on SpaceX's next fueling milestone, the Raptor engine chill, coming up at T-minus 19 minutes and 40 seconds. T-minus 19 minutes, 39 seconds and counting. At this point, Raptor engine chill should be getting underway. One of the things that we haven't touched on much yet is the flight profile for today's mission. For those of you who watched Starship Flight 9, it is essentially a wash, rinse, repeat scenario for Flight 9. Slightly different, but largely you can copy and paste that mission into what we're about to see today. But let's go ahead and give a more decisive look at the flight timeline. After T0, we'll see liftoff of the full 400-plus foot tall stack, about 2 seconds after that T0 mark. The rocket will pass through max Q, which is the moment of greatest aerodynamic pressure on the rocket. That'll be followed about a minute and a half after that by booster MECO, which for Starship means most engines cut off, not a full MECO like we see on a Falcon 9 rocket where all of the 9 main engines cut off. That'll be followed seconds later by hot staging, which is when the Raptor engines on the ship upper stage kick on and the ship will separate from the Super Heavy booster. That'll be followed 10 seconds afterwards by the boost back burn beginning. It'll shut down less than a minute later. Then the hot stage ring will be jettisoned from the top of the Super Heavy booster. The landing burn on booster 16 will start at about T plus 6 minutes and 20 seconds into flight. Last about 20 seconds or so with the booster designed to hover above the waters of the Gulf before splashing down in the water below. At T plus 8 minutes and 57 seconds, that's when the ship upper stage will conclude its first burn and then go into a coast phase until T plus 18 minutes and 27 seconds. If successful, this will be the first time that we see the payload deployment of those Starlink simulators. There are 8 of them on board this particular Starship upper stage. The end of the deployment demo will wrap up at T plus 25 minutes and 32 seconds. About 12 minutes afterwards, the Raptor in-space relight demonstration will happen. Just a quick burn of one of the upper stage engines. About 10 minutes after that, the entry sequence will begin as Starship begins to make its way towards a splashdown in the Indian Ocean. The vehicle will become transonic at about T plus 1 hour, 3 minutes, and 15 seconds. Then transition to becoming subsonic about a minute and 15 seconds afterwards. There will be a landing flip designed to happen at T plus 1 hour, 6 minutes, and 14 seconds. Followed by the final landing burn for a soft splashdown in the waters of the Indian Ocean just about 10 seconds afterwards. Now T minus 15 minutes, 31 seconds in counting. The next milestone coming up for SpaceX will be the conclusion of ship prop load at about T minus 3 minutes and 20 seconds, followed by the booster prop load concluding about 30 seconds after that. Time now T-minus 13 minutes, 24 seconds and counting. As we're closing into what will hopefully be the conclusion of our last countdown for the launch of Starship Flight 10. I want to thank the more than 18,500 of you who are watching along with us live today. Be sure to let us know also in the live chat where you're checking in from. I know we have plenty of folks that are down there in South Texas to see this launch for yourselves in person. Got Larry Lenhart checking in from Texas City. Koopa Troopa joining us from Houston. Renee in Tennessee. Obi-Wan in Glendale, Arizona. Got Nova Scotia in the house as well from Atlantic Photo Supply. Want to take a look visually at the flight profile that we were just talking about in more written text. You can see this now in motion. As mentioned, stage separation will be followed by the boost back burn and the jettison of the hot stage ring. And there will be hovering. There's a landing burn experiment. You can see the deployment of those simulator Starlink satellites, the engine relight that are on tap during the coast phase, and then the re-entry in the Indian Ocean to the northeast of Australia. Hopefully we'll see a good splashdown in the waters of the Indian Ocean like we saw back on Flight 6. And it has been since that last flight of a Block 1 ship upper stage that SpaceX has been able to perform a nominal flight of its upper stage. Update from SpaceX weather, now green for weather, which is certainly a good improvement on what we saw earlier today and even just yesterday. You can see the current fuel levels on the ship upper stage and the Super Heavy booster. Weather green, range green, vehicle is healthy. Fueling expected to begin again on ship propellant at about T-minus 3 minutes and 20 seconds. Booster prop load will conclude at T-minus 2 minutes and 50 seconds. .10 minutes on the clock. Want to thank Sandy RN in California for a $10 super chat. It says 10 for flight number 10. That will launch perfectly, is Sandy's prediction. And wouldn't that just be terrific? Here's hoping that it is as close to perfect as certainly as possible. Also want to thank Tim Carter for a $10 super chat. Thank you, Tim. Ship performing a couple of flat tests real quick. Before we get to liftoff, want to check back in one last time before T0 with our friend and fellow space reporter Stephen Clark, doing some great work at Ars Technica, and they're live at the watch site. They're about 3 miles to the east of the pad. Stephen, we're right down to the thick of it. How is the mood down there at Starbase? Apologies, we're having a little bit of an audio issue with Steven. We'll work to get it
Hey,
back
Will,
in
can you hear
just
me
a
now?
moment. Yes, we got you now.
Great. Yeah, I heard your question. I guess I wasn't coming through, but just wanted to say the mood here is, I think it was one of anticipation. Everything is looking really good for a launch at 6:30 p.m. Central Time, 7:30 p.m. Eastern. The weather has really cleared out nicely. Lots of blue sky, very few clouds overhead in the sky. In fact, along the flight path, I don't see any clouds. So we may have really good visibility for a while of Super Heavy and Starship as they ascend into the sky, and then hopefully staging and the booster making its return out to the Gulf. So we hope to have great visibility, no haze, no fog to speak of. I've been here for a few launches, and this is, I think, some of the best weather that we've had for a Starship launch that I can recall, the ones I've been to at least. I've missed a few. So really excited, and I think everyone is starting to get into position. I just finished setting up my camera and checking the settings, so everything looking good here.
Yeah, we'll look forward to seeing the photos that you're able to capture, and we'll check back with you on the other side of liftoff. Stephen Clark with Ars Technica. Want to go to some video here from SpaceX showing an animation of what the future of Slick 37 will eventually look like, with a pair of Starship pads that are in the plans for SpaceX operations for Starship here in the Sunshine State. There's a look at the planned version of the Gigabay facility that will be erected near the Hangar X site, just down the road from where we are at the press site here at the Kennedy Space Center. Here's a look at some video from Launch Complex 39A. You can see the Starship Tower there adjacent to the water tower and the Falcon pad that is quite busy and actually getting ready to launch a batch of Starlink satellites in a couple of days. Just under 6 minutes to go. We've got just a couple minutes left before the conclusion of fueling on the ship upper stage. Less than 5 minutes to go. Range remains good to support. Weather also green per the SpaceX commentators. No, you're fine. I certainly missed things. Yeah, all good. Teamwork. Got 3.5 minutes left on the clock. At this point, the ship loading should be complete. Waiting for confirmation of that. Also, Super Heavy booster load should wrap up in just about 15 seconds from now. 2 minutes and counting. SpaceX commentators note they are working no issues at this point. Right now, no plans to hold the count at T-minus 40 seconds. If something comes up in the next minute, they do have the option to hold at T-minus 40 seconds if needed, or if there's something that comes up between 40 seconds and 10 seconds before the deluge activates, they can recycle to T-minus 40 seconds as well. A good view of those 33 Raptor engines. Might get a little thrust vector control or TVC wiggle. Nope, moving right along. Good view out at Starbase. One minute and counting. You can see Hawthorne on the right, the former headquarters of SpaceX, coming up on that 40-second gateway. Passing through the 40-second gateway. Coming up on the SpaceX launch director giving their go for launch. Let's listen in.
Maciek Batura, take us the rest of the way. 30 seconds, the 10th.
And we did hear a go for launch call for Starship Flight 10 coming up in just about 20 seconds. 15 seconds. And here we go in 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. And we have liftoff. Motion. And Starship Flight 10 is on its way. Let's listen in.
Booster chamber pressure nominal.
All right, we're a little over 40 seconds into flight. 33 out of
Booster and
33
ship,
Raptor
avionics,
engines.
power and telemetry nominal.
Getting good call outs, healthy systems on the booster as it starts to pitch over the Gulf. All right, we're a little over 1 minute into flight, about to pass through max Q.
Max Q.
All right, so we are through the period of maximum dynamic pressure, max stress on the vehicle as it continues to fly.
Our next major event is going to be hot staging, which is happening in just over 90 seconds from now. To get ready, the booster will shut down all but 3 of its Raptor engines. The clamps holding the 2 stages together will release, and the Starship second stage ignites its engines. The ship then separates from the Super Heavy booster and heads to space. At the same time, the 3 engines still firing on Super Heavy will flip the booster around.
We'll continue to monitor the SpaceX comments, but we just want to note that one of the middle ring engines has been lost as the booster begins its ascent. This is the first time in a couple of missions that we've seen SpaceX lose one of those engines on ascent. As you heard from the SpaceX commentators, though, we are coming up to the hot staging point in the mission. First, we'll see most engines cut off intentionally. It's coming up in just about 10 seconds. That'll be followed by hot staging when those 6 Raptor engines on the ship upper stage ignite, the 2 stages separate, and then we'll see the start of the boost back burn. Engines on the booster are starting to throttle down.
Ship ignition. Boost back burn startup. Stage separation.
6 engines on the upper stage, still seeing one of those middle engines out. Boost back burn underway. Again, SpaceX will not be attempting a catch of the Super Heavy booster, but will perform a couple of experiments as it makes a splashdown in the Gulf. Ship chamber pressure nominal. Now 3.5 minutes into the mission, the boost back burn shutdown. It's where we are on the timeline of things. Your call for boost back burn shutdown. Still seeing views from both stages. Should see the hot ring jettison now in just a moment. One of the adjustments between Flight 9 to Flight 10 was shifting the what's called the angle of attack, the angle compared to the horizon at which the booster is going to be making its approach back down towards the waters of the Gulf. There you see the hot staging ring has been jettisoned. Didn't hear a call for it, but you can see it flying separately from the booster. SpaceX is set to perform intentionally an off-nominal scenario with the booster landing burn. Super Heavy on a nominal trajectory. SpaceX going to be lighting 2 out of the 3 center engines. Normally it would use 3 center engines for the landing burn. The landing burn will use 13 engines to begin with, but once it gets down normally to the center 3 engines, SpaceX this time around will use just 2 out of those 3, in addition to one of the middle ring engines, to test for a future off-nominal scenario. If it happens that one of the center engines gets knocked out, that a middle ring engine can compensate for a safe touchdown on a future flight. Coming upon the 6-minute mark, the landing burn set to start at about T plus 6 minutes and 20 seconds. Seeing the glow of the aft section as the booster comes back through. About 10 seconds to the start of the landing burn. Let's listen in.
All right, here we go.
Landing burn startup.
Looks like we got 12 of those 13.
Down to 3, including one of the middle ring.
Looks like the ship is hovering as intended.
Down to 2. Nice little hover. And landing burn shutdown. And into the Gulf, here we come. And the booster has splashed down.
Incredible.
And now all eyes once again on the ship upper stage as it continues its climb uphill. SpaceX had issues getting through the initial burn for Flights 7 and 8. Ship engine cutoff is coming up at about T plus 8 minutes and 57 seconds. Ship 9 was able to perform a full ascent burn using the upper stage engines. So far, Ship 37 on pace to repeat that accomplishment. We'll see where things go from there. Got about 1 minute left on the upper stage burn here. So far, looks like a relatively stable flight of the ship upper stage. Less than a minute to go before the engines shut down. Heard a call out just now that ship is on terminal guidance, which means they're coming up to the end of this burn. Less than 30 seconds now. Nice view of the engine section. You see the larger engine bells. Those are the Raptor vacuum engines. The three in the center are the sea level engines.
Ship engine cutoff.
We shut down those center three. Successful ship engine cutoff.
And ship 37 making it through what appeared to be a nominal shutdown. Good call for nominal orbit good orbit insertion was the call. This is a suborbital flight. So we'll not make a full orbit around the Earth, but rather make plans for a splashdown in the waters of the Indian Ocean. Nice actuation of the flaps there. Moving into what SpaceX commentators call the stowed position. Coming up on 10 minutes into flight. Nice view of one of the aft flaps there. Coming up in less than 9 minutes at T plus 8 minutes and 27 seconds. That will be the next big milestone, something that SpaceX was unable to accomplish last go around, or any point with its Starship upper stage, which is the deployment of those simulator Starlink satellites. That deployment sequence will begin at T plus 18 minutes and 27 seconds. That deployment demo will last until T plus 25 minutes and 32 seconds. Now 12 minutes into the flight, just about 6.5 minutes to go until the start of the payload demonstration. Want to bring in Ars Technica space reporter Stephen Clark, who is there at Starbase and got to see the ascent and the booster splashdown with his own eyes and hear it with his own ears. Stephen, bring us into the moment. What was it like at liftoff, and what are your thoughts on the mission so far?
Yeah, well, another spectacular Starship launch down here in South Texas. My impression so far is everything appears to have gone perfectly, other than I think I have not seen the video replay, but I heard in SpaceX's stream that they may have lost a Raptor engine on the booster. But by all accounts, the booster made a good splashdown out in the Gulf. hitting the marks right as SpaceX expected to. And I think even more importantly for the goals of this flight, we got through a full burn of all 6 Raptor engines on the ship, and it reached the expected velocity right on the money. I just went back and compared the injection velocity from this launch, compared it to the last launch, which also reached a nominal insertion despite the fuel leak. And the difference was 1 kilometer per hour according to SpaceX's telemetry stream. So I think that is an indication that everything has gone very well. We're looking inside the payload bay of Starship now, where we see the Starlink simulators stacked, ready for their deployment tests in a few minutes. Don't see any signs of any flakes of ice or methane in there. So like we saw on the last flight, so that's a great sign as well. Can't wait to see the deployment of these Starlink simulators.
Yeah, I was just about to call attention to that if you hadn't already. Yeah, it was good to see those Starlink simulators for just a brief moment there, and to not see any of the flakes of what, based off of the SpaceX post-flight analysis and the description of what happened during Flight 9, some liquid methane in the nose cone section. So certainly, and here's that view inside. The COPVs are those black cylinders on the left-hand side of the camera as well. The trouble spot that caused the destruction of Ship 36 and prevented it from being the ship that flew this Flight 10 mission. So SpaceX got some learning from that on-the-ground anomaly, folded that in to the ship that we see right here. And coming up in just about 4 minutes from now, a little less than 4 minutes, we'll see, if all goes well, those Starlink simulators head out the door. At some point in the future, when SpaceX is flying the version 3 edition of its Starship, we'll see production Starlink satellites that will be stacked high inside this nose cone. That will be deployed as we've seen in the animation. Seeing a little bit of some kind of vapor inside. SpaceX commentator Dan Hout saying this is some residual gas. So they don't sound terribly concerned with this little wispy gas that we're seeing here. So presumably this won't be a showstopper to the payload deployment coming up here in just about 2.5 minutes.
Yeah, that does look interesting to me. I'm not sure what could be causing that. It does look like mist almost, very diffuse, thin gas of some kind.
Yeah, I don't pretend to be a chemist. It certainly doesn't look like the flakes that we saw during Flight 9. I wonder if this gas may be, I don't know if this would be gaseous nitrogen. I wouldn't think it would have a color to it. But again, I don't pretend to be a chemist. I went through AP Chem in high school, and that was about the extent of my experience on that side of things.
Well, I'm about the same boat as you, Will, but I will say it looks rather ghostly.
There's it. Looks like it's being sucked down, so the Pez dispenser door apparently is now starting to open. As SpaceX commentators noted that we would see that gas dissipate, get sucked out into the vacuum of space once the door is open. So by all accounts, that's a good sign that it has now suddenly vanished into this good night. SpaceX is in payload deploy prep at this point, and we should see the first jettison happen, the first ever deployment from a Starship upper stage, coming now in less than 1 minute. And confirmation that the door has opened. All good signs for SpaceX to achieve a milestone not seen yet before. with less than 30 seconds to go. Let's go ahead and listen in for the callouts for this first ever deployment from a Starship upper stage.
Into the vacuum of space.
About 15 seconds until payload deploy.
Ship has transitioned to payload deploy. There we go. Pew pew. Been waiting way too long to do that. There we go.
There goes another one. Super exciting moment, as you can hear the energy in both Hawthorne and Starbase. Everyone's super excited for finally getting to deploy some of those simulated satellites.
Pez system moving down. Next row. There we go. As we said, we're going to do about one every minute or so. And this is just kind of a dress rehearsal for when we're going to be deploying the V3 satellites. And these are just a massive, massive increase to Starlink's capability. Each one of them has its 60 terabits per second of capacity that's going to get added to the network per launch. That's 20 times more than what we're adding with every single Falcon 9 launch today, which, you know, step increase in capability. There goes another one. All right, so as we said, we've got 8 total that we're going to go through today. It's about a minute for each one, but looking good on payload deploy. All right, so we're about halfway through. When we actually start launching the V3 Starlinks on Starship, we're going to be flying about 60 each time. So it'll be about an hour to get through a full stack. But again, it's just going to be a massive increase in the amount of bandwidth. It's going to enable, you know, gigabit upload download for people with Starlink, you know, anywhere on the planet. And for us, Starlink is just a tremendous part of just the Starship flight test program.
Yeah, absolutely. Always getting us that data, and yeah, the amazing views we have on the vehicle today.
So we're now just a little more than 23 minutes into the mission, as you heard, about halfway through this deployment sequence. Bringing back in Stephen Clark, space reporter with Ars Technica. Stephen, seeing something that we have never seen on a Starship vehicle before, a deployment of an actual payload. Again, this is a suborbital flight for those watching, so these are not functional Starlinks, nor are they going into orbital space. They'll follow the same suborbital trajectory as the ship upper stage, but like you said, a secondary milestone perhaps for SpaceX, but certainly an important one that they really wanted to demonstrate today.
Yes, that's the first time we're seeing this, so we're all learning here as we go, because none of us really, outside of SpaceX engineers, knew exactly how this would work. We've seen the artists' illustrations, the animations, kind of had a general sense of it, but we're seeing the actual hardware in motion as it deploys each one of these simulators and then adjusts down to realign for the PEZ door and then puts another one out into space. This is all happening at night. This is an suborbital night pass. But suppose the ship is out somewhere over the Atlantic Ocean right now. I think we can see that in the bottom right part of the screen from SpaceX's live stream, out in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean at night. So not sure what the cameras externally are seeing. We're not seeing those from SpaceX right now. Maybe nothing. Hence, maybe that's why we're seeing inside the ship right now.
Yeah, and interesting to get a little more color. As you mentioned, we've been left to speculate on quite a bit of what this process would actually look like in motion, as well as just the real execution for SpaceX in the future. Interesting note from commentator Dan that future versions of this PEZ dispenser apparatus will deploy about 60 of the V3 Starlink satellites per batch, at least as things begin, and it will take about a minute per Starlink satellite, so pretty long, hour-long release sequence once the ship is on orbit and ready to release the future version 3 of Starlinks. Certainly a far longer deployment sequence than we're used to experiencing with the current iteration of Starlink satellites on a Falcon 9 rocket, where they would just release the holding rods and then just let the full stack go in one fell swoop. It's a lot slower and more deliberate here this go around, or at least it will be when they start flying the production satellites.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you mentioned that, because that's something that I didn't know. I'm not sure that was public knowledge. So 60 V3 Starlink satellites per Starship launch in the future, and quite a long deployment sequence, as you mentioned. So we haven't really heard an update from SpaceX that I've heard recently about the production status of the V3 Starlinks. Presumably they've had a lot of time to get that nailed down and to get those prototypes built and get through some ground testing, since they've been waiting on Starship to be ready to launch them. But I said this a few missions ago, but if this mission goes well, I could foresee one of these Starship missions deploying a batch of V3 Starlinks rather soon. Probably not the next one, but maybe a couple of missions down the line. But we'll see. They have to get into orbit, and at that point, when they get into orbit, they need to be reasonably confident that the heat shield will work, and that's what we're about to learn in a few minutes' time as this thing comes down over the Indian Ocean.
Yeah, one thing that I don't recall hearing in the Starlink video that was part of the SpaceX broadcast from yesterday and that was rerun today was whether or how far into the testing and production they are of the V3 satellites, and if they are ready to launch a batch of them as soon as Starship is ready, potentially later this year, or if there's still some work left to do on the engineering for V3 Starlink satellites. So that'll be interesting to see. Where we are right now for folks at home is T plus 28 minutes, 7 seconds, and counting. Less than 9 minutes from now is when we'll see that in-space relight demonstration of one of the Raptor engines. That'll happen at about T plus 37 minutes and 48 seconds. It'll be just a quick burn of one of those Raptor engines, but, you know, Stephen, as SpaceX works to get Starship ready for orbital flights, it needs to be able to prove not only that it can safely come back through the atmosphere, but that it can perform a proper deorbit burn so that you don't have this massive object in an uncontrolled manner just hanging out in low Earth orbit.
Yep, exactly. So I think that's one of the reasons why they're doing the in-space Raptor restart again. It's just to build confidence. They've done it before successfully, just to gain some confidence in its reliability that it will be able to execute the deorbit burn. And then, the heat shield. They want to know if it will be able to protect the ship from these temperatures of close to 2,600, 2,700 degrees Fahrenheit as it comes down into the atmosphere. And so these upcoming next milestones really are important prerequisites, I would say, or precursors to getting the ship all the way into orbit. The ship has the technical ability today to get into low Earth orbit, but as you mentioned, the problem is they don't want to get it into orbit and can't get it back to Earth or back out of orbit and have it cause a problem as a piece of space junk or something. So these next two tests are important to on the path toward orbital flight.
Absolutely. Going back to the start of the mission, I know you were outside and obviously watching the mission with your own eyes and getting some great shots of the ascent of Starship, so look forward to seeing what you got through your camera. But just wanted to re-rack now that we're in a bit of a quiet period before the relight demo. You had mentioned in your mind if the Super Heavy booster had an engine or so that were out on the boost back burn, that probably wasn't a big deal in your frame of mind, and we did see that in this go round. One of the middle engines did not relight either for the boost back burn or the very start of the landing burn. Also did notice one of that same middle engine was out during the initial ascent of the booster as well, which I believe is the first time we've seen an engine out on ascent in at least 2, maybe 3, or maybe even more missions. That it might be going back to Flight 6 the last time we saw an engine out on ascent. But I'm guessing that is sort of in line with where you thought things might be at this point, right, Stephen?
Yeah, exactly. I think those, quote unquote, little things. I think I said that pre-launch as well. It's not really a little thing when you lose an engine, but we've obviously seen Super Heavy recover and be resilient to a couple of engine failures before, and one of the purposes of this landing demonstration for the Super Heavy booster out in the Gulf was to demonstrate its ability to be resilient against a failure of one of those center engines. So they were already going to intentionally disable that engine on the landing burn to show that it could substitute another engine for that final retro burn to slow down for splashdown. And so we SpaceX obviously doesn't want engines to fail, but they have a Raptor 3 engine that many people are eager to see debut on next generation Starship and Super Heavy. That is promised to be more reliable, cheaper to manufacture. Of course, we'll see how that goes in flight testing, but we're still on the 10th flight of something of a vehicle that I think will fly hundreds of times before a person ever gets on board, if not thousands.
Yeah, you mentioning a person getting on board just sort of jogged my thinking about things. Before he was in line to be the NASA administrator, we were potentially looking at Jared Isaacman being one of the first humans to ride aboard a crewed version of Starship. Obviously, things are a little in question with the Polaris program and what may happen next for Flight 2, and then, if there's going to be a Flight 3 with Starship, or what may become of all that now that Jared has dipped into politics for a little bit, dipped out, and, has said in some news publications that he may entertain a run for elected office in some form or fashion. So, given all that, and obviously Starship being on the Artemis 3 flight path, do you think Artemis 3 may end up being the first time that we see humans board a Starship vehicle, or do you think some other commercial venture may come to the fore and give NASA a little taste of what they will experience with their astronauts?
No, I just don't know, Will. I think the big challenge for so-called human rating Starship, isn't necessarily in space or even the launch. It's probably the return of the ship to the catch, the reentry and return of the ship to the catch on the tower. I think that is probably the most difficult thing to gain confidence in and to certify for human flight. And second of all, the launch as well, I guess, would also be rather difficult because there's no launch abort system that we know of that's being developed for Starship. So in the event of an anomaly or failure in flight during ascent, no way for the crew to get out of the ship that we know of. There may be something going on behind the scenes in that regard. But yeah, so I think the first time humans board a Starship will be in space, be it after docking with an Orion spacecraft on Artemis 3 mission, or docking with a Dragon spacecraft potentially in low Earth orbit on a commercial mission. So to transfer the crew from either Orion to Dragon into Starship. As for which one happens first, who knows? I really can't even speculate. I can see arguments either way.
Well, we will just have to wait and see. We're going to go ahead and let Steven go for a little bit here as we're awaiting our next milestone on ship. We'll welcome him back a little bit further into the broadcast. Currently T plus 35 minutes, 39 seconds and counting. Coming up, the next milestone is that in-space Raptor relight, which is coming up now in 2 minutes. And as we look forward to that, I want to catch up on some of the folks in the live chat have been very generous with their time and super chats. Appreciate the 29,000 of you who are still along with us for the ride here. If you haven't already, it'd be super helpful if you could give that this video a like and share the stream. We'll have some folks that may have paused after liftoff and splashdown of the booster find their way back into this live launch coverage, since we've got a number of more milestones still ahead on this mission, including, of course, that Raptor relight and the reentry period. Jeff Gibson with a $2 super chat, checking in from Slidell, Louisiana. Uber Mike with a $10 super chat, joining us from Iron County in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, in the UP. Seeing a look at the engine section of the ship upper stage. As we're approaching that Raptor relight, we'll come back to the super chat here in just a moment. Let's go ahead and listen in for the comments in the call out.
Something we're really going to have to do when we're doing orbital missions. So it's a pretty critical test. We are just a couple seconds away. Sorry, we're about 20 seconds away, psych. So we got a little bit more time. So we are going to see one of those Raptor engines light back up. We are through the deorbit demo gate, so we should be seeing it momentarily.
Relight demo startup. And shutdown.
All right, looks like we confirmed the relight of one of those center Raptor engines. Second time we've done that. Super exciting.
Nominal
Huge
orbit
congrats
insertion.
to the team on this milestone. Very exciting to see.
That was a cool light show. Yeah, I get to do a mini version here. So again, that's going to be really critical for when we're doing deorbit burns. Like as you're going through, which if you don't have one of these, my God, they're so much fun. But like you're able to actually like light. Oh, Dan, turn it on. Light that engine. Not set my co-host on fire. And that's what we'll eventually do to, break out of orbit, come back down to Earth. So really cool to see one of those engines light back up again in space. That was our last in-space thing.
Very exciting. We're going to be heading back for re-entry at about T plus 45 minutes. So we're going to take another quick break, and we will see you soon.
And we will continue to keep our eyes on the ship upper stage following that good upper stage engine burn demonstration. The next milestone is coming up in just about 10 minutes from now when the entry period for Ship 37 will begin. As you can see from the telemetry data on the bottom of the big box, you can see the altitude is starting to drop on the ship as it gets closer to making its atmospheric re-entry. Also, the orientation of the ship has adjusted in more of its entry mode, coming up to what SpaceX calls its entry interface. We're now T plus 42 minutes. 9 seconds and counting on the mission from the SpaceX timeline of things. Full-on entry is expected around T plus 47 minutes and 29 seconds. Now dropped down to about 115 kilometers in altitude and continuing its descent. SpaceX is targeting a nominal splashdown in the waters of the Indian Ocean to the northeast of Australia. As you can see from the globe in the bottom, next to the ship orientation, you can see it's just now cruising over the island of Madagascar. They're off the southern half of the African continent. And a nice view inside the engine section here. Saw a good view of that Raptor burn with the E3 in the middle there, engine 3. Starting to get some peaks of an orbital sunrise there just off the edge of this aft flap camera view. Oh, it looks like some peeling on that aft flap as well. Of course, SpaceX is learning in all manners how the ship performs during its various modes of operation, during the deployment of the Starlink simulator satellites, the Raptor relight, and, of course, entry coming up here. You can actually see on this forward flap a decal of a Dragon spacecraft right near that middle hinge. SpaceX just flew its most recent Dragon capsule to the International Space Station on the Commercial Resupply Services 33 or CRS-33 mission that docked to station on Monday morning. Now T plus 45 minutes, 13 seconds and counting. A little bit of maneuvering here as SpaceX looks at this aft flap. Looks like a couple of those tiles may have peeled up from when we saw them earlier on in the mission. SpaceX's goal, of course, is to create a fully reusable heat shield, one that requires minimal and eventually, ideally, no major refurbishment before it's able to fly again. Just about 92 kilometers in altitude and descending. Still more than 26,800 kilometers per hour. So still a blistering speed that Starship is traveling as it makes its way towards splashdown in the Indian Ocean. Oh, and it saw quite a bit of liberation there. Unclear what just all of a sudden caused a chunk of the aft skirt to just shred there. Looking at the orientation of ship, though, it doesn't look like the attitude has made any discernible shifting even with that. SpaceX commentators noting that the goal of these test flights are to fly Starship in the most stressful environment that it can to find the outer limits of what it can tolerate. You can see some pieces still being liberated away from that flap there. I believe this is a camera on the forward flap looking back at one of the aft flaps, is the orientation that we're seeing here. SpaceX notes that where the vehicle is in its point of entry, it's in a dense enough part of the atmosphere that the flaps can control some of the ship's coordination and its attitude, not just the reaction control system thrusters. Nearly 50 minutes into the mission at this point. Vehicle should be transonic at about T plus 1 hour, 3 minutes, and 15 seconds. Continuing to see chunks that are liberating from that flap section. Possibly a piece of the metal skin on the other side. Coming up in about 3 minutes, according to SpaceX, ship should be in enough sunlight that we should be able to see a little bit more context around the vehicle. And that's the aft flap that we were seeing some of the liberation from, and you can see more decisively what was being liberated. Starting to see a little bit of the reentry plasma starting to creep through the furthest close to the engine section side of the aft flap. SpaceX says that there, once again, like we saw with Flight 6, that there is a camera on a buoy out in the waters of the Indian Ocean near the planned landing site that has Starlink that is supporting it. So we may get some good views of the ship as it makes its splashdown coming up here in about 14 minutes or so. See a little bit of the sunrise there, just on the other side of the aft flap here, continuing to make its way down towards the Indian Ocean, 67 kilometers and descending. Seeing a nice view of the Earth beyond the aft flap as well. All of this learning today is very key for SpaceX since they have been unable to perform re-entry this controlled since Flight 6, the last time that they flew a Block 1 variant of the ship upper stage. And this is the first time, not only this year, but with a Block 2 variant of ship, that they've been able to get this far. Now 55 minutes into flight. .63 kilometers in altitude. Good view of the Pez dispenser door as well in this view of the Starship upper stage, ship 37. .56 minutes so far in flight. SpaceX calling out that the ship has passed peak heating. So the greatest amount of stress that Starship is expected to experience. And we've got the view of the globe there in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen, so you can see Starship's position relative to the Earth. Just under 61 kilometers in altitude. coming up on the next milestone where ship will deploy its aft flaps fully. Let's go ahead and listen in.
All right. See those flaps swinging out? Again, we're putting ship through the ringer on this flight in. It's like we're still maintaining control. All right, flaps earning their paycheck today, getting through kind of that max stressing.
Definitely things looking good so far. We're about 2 minutes out now from Starship becoming transonic.
One cool thing to note as we get some of those views showing kind of the whole length of the ship, one of the changes we made after Flight 6 was to change the tile line a little bit. So we had kind of scaled back the number of tiles significantly, as when we go to catch these ships, you don't want to, I think as Elon said, you don't want to shuck the ship as you catch it and knock all those tiles off. So we knew we were going to have to kind of peel back that layer a little bit. And the first time we did it was on Flight 6, and we saw kind of wrinkling and dimples almost in the ship as we were creating these hot spots in the uneven parts of the heat shield. And so to kind of address that, we smoothed it out. That's why you've got kind of that nice smoothed out black line now on the ship. And just looking at it, we can see kind of a little bit of hot spot, a little bit of warping almost. Near the payload door, you can see a little bit of colored patina up above it, but we don't see those kind of deep, almost, they almost look like gouges on that. So it looks like that's been pretty successful. So, all right, we are less than a minute away from hitting transonic. Again, pretty soon our forward velocity is going to look like it's kind of falling off a cliff, and Starship will look like it's falling off a cliff as we essentially go into our belly flop. If you watched some of the high altitude tests or suborbital campaigns, we were able to test that. It was a pretty fundamental, like, can this thing actually fly? And we were able to prove that out with that suborbital campaign. And that's what we're about to see shortly here. All right, so at this point, we've dropped below the speed of sound, so Starship itself is subsonic. We are starting to chill the engines for a landing burn attempt. Landing flip supposed to start in a little over 2 minutes. Subsonic Indian Ocean, we're on our way.
Starship is subsonic.
There we go. Farewell, space. All right, so coming up in just a little under 2 minutes, so we're going to do the flip and the burn. So we're only using those 3 center Raptor engines, the sea levels, the ones that can kind of gimbal, that can move around and steer. Dipping the nose down a little bit. Got 2 of our engines chilled in, waiting on 1 more. So again, we'll attempt to use 3 burns for that initial flip. We eventually go down to just 2 Raptors for the end of the landing burn.
Just about 1 minute now from that landing flip and landing burn start.
Structurally, we're looking good. Got good pressures in our nose cone for everything. Just about 30 seconds. So again, we're going to look for the flip. So Starship's doing its belly flop right now. We're going to do the flip. Swing out. Let's punch through some clouds first. Here we go.
Starship landing burn startup.
Seeing 3 engines. There's our flip. There's a buoy.
Oh my God.
There's a splashdown.
Oh my God.
Hey. Oh man, yeah. Farewell, Ship 37. Thank you, buoy cam. Landing flip, landing burn, splash out of the Indian Ocean. There we go. Whew. All right. That was pretty awesome.
Incredible flight
cool, right?
today for both ship and booster.
Yeah, really incredible. So obviously we're excited here. It looks like everybody's excited over there. Tyler, how's it going over?
And an exciting conclusion, certainly, for the wrap-up of Ship 37, a good buoy view out in the Indian Ocean that was able to be perfectly positioned in order to capture Ship 37 as it made its splashdown in the waters there. The most successful flight of a Block 2 upper stage. There is one more Block 2 ship that has yet to fly, so given the successes that SpaceX saw with this mission, of course, still some learnings that came out of this, but predominantly, as far as we were able to tell from this flight, a pretty darn successful mission as far as performing the in-space demonstrations that they were hoping to achieve with the deployment of the 8 Starlink simulator satellites, the in-space Raptor relight, and a splashdown right on target in the Indian Ocean as expected. Before we go ahead and wrap things up, want to bring back in our friend and fellow space reporter with Ars Technica, Stephen Clark. Stephen, it was the big milestone in your mind getting through re-entry for a splashdown in the Indian Ocean. Lots of learning is going to come from the data off that heat shield. Your thoughts on the most successful flight of a Block 2 ship upper stage?
Yeah, by far the most successful flight of a Block 2 upper stage, and dare I say, the first fully successful flight of a Block 2 Starship upper stage. Everything appeared to go very, very well. We saw, obviously, we talked about the engine out during the launch on the booster, and that was a little glitch that obviously engineers will need to look at. The other thing I would note is we saw some damage to one or perhaps even both of the aft flaps on the ship, but the heat shield seemed to hold up, and we saw some really it's hard to explain, but we saw that very energetic event, that big puff of debris coming out of the aft skirt as well during the early part of the reentry. Not sure what that was. Had some of us here concerned that it wasn't going to quite make it all the way down to the surface with a landing burn, but it seemed to come down right on the money, right near the buoy that was there waiting for it. One thing that was interesting is we saw some strange coloration on the ship as it splashed down. Haven't seen that before in my recollection from previous flights that made it all the way to the Indian Ocean. So some interesting takeaways from the flight, but certainly I think everyone at SpaceX has to be very happy with the outcome today.
Yeah, I can't imagine it's anything more than elation down at Starbase over in Hawthorne, and for the folks here in Florida who are preparing for Starship's emergence at Slick 37 at the Cape side and Pad 39A here at the Kennedy Space Center. In the run-up to this mission on Friday, we heard Kiko Donchev say that SpaceX was going to make sure that Starship was a well-seasoned rocket, that they had worked out the lion's share of the kinks before coming to Florida, and today was a big step towards that milestone. So they have to be certainly thrilled with where things are and looking ahead now to the final flight of a Block 2 ship, potentially sooner rather than later, given the what appear to be, very few major anomalies on this mission.
Yeah, exactly. One more Block 2 ship to fly, and then on to version 3 and potentially operational flights at some point very soon from the second pad here at Starbase. But yeah, everything appeared to go very well. They hit every milestone they were looking for. Did it go perfectly? No, but this is still a test program, and little things like engine out or burn through on or some damage to the flaps we've seen before. Certainly, that's something that SpaceX needs to improve on before they can get to so-called operational flights of Starship. But given the results of the last 3 flights and that really dramatic explosion of the Ship 36 at the test site here at Starbase a couple of months ago, today's flight was a much-needed success for the Starship program.
Indeed, and I know you've got to go off and start writing your post-launch story, much to talk about with this mission. Last question to you, Stephen, then. Given that they were able to perform the Raptor relight on orbit for just the second time in program history, deploy Starlink simulator satellites for the first time in the 10 flights of the integrated Starship rocket, and get some good heat shield data, what are your expectations for Flight 11? Do you think it'll be largely a rinse and repeat just to make sure that they can fly this flight profile the same again, or do you think there's any new tricks they're going to try to pull out of the bag in the next go around?
I don't know. There are so many ways that they could go with the next flight. Perhaps they return booster to the tower for a catch on the next flight. We don't know if that's in the cards, but it wouldn't surprise me given how well the splashdown off the coast appeared to go with the Super Heavy booster this afternoon. As for the ship, I don't know if they're going to go all the way to orbit with version 2. It seems kind of unlikely to me, but been surprised before by SpaceX. But I would imagine that's a version 3 objective, is to go all the way to orbit with actual Starlink satellites. But they could attempt a different entry trajectory, stress the ship in different ways during reentry on the next. Some damage on the way down on this flight. Or maybe they've discovered that the damage that was caused in this flight was strictly due to the angles and the trajectory they attempted today. You know, maybe on a nominal trajectory, the ship would have not had any issues. So I think all that is future work for SpaceX engineers over the next few weeks before they decide exactly what they want to do with Flight 11.
Yeah, exactly. I suppose one thing that was sort of an early flight path that hasn't been returned to in quite some time is a flight that would take the ship to a splashdown off the coast of Hawaii. Remember that was, in the cards back in the first integrated flight tests, and has since shifted to the Indian Ocean. So perhaps that could come back into play once again, but more than likely, I think we'll see something somewhat similar to what we saw here today. So we will have to all watch and wait with bated breath with what the SpaceX engineers decide to cook up for Flight 11 of the Starship program. Stephen, now that this launch is behind us, we can look ahead to the future. And where can folks in the not too distant future find your write-up of this flight and your other reporting on the Space Beat?
Sure. The main place, of course, is arstechnica.com. It's arstechnica.com, and there you'll find the work of all of my wonderful colleagues. But for those of you most interested in the Space Beat, you'll see the reporting from myself and my esteemed colleague Eric Berger, who cover the space program, space industry there for Ars Technica. And I'm also on an X at Stephen Clark 1.
And everyone should go ahead and give them a follow if you're not already. Stephen, thanks for joining us now 3 times, which was in fact the charm for Starship Flight 10. Have a good night, my friend.
My pleasure. Have a good night, Will. Thank you.
Thank you. And I want to thank our moderators in the live chat who've been helping us out there at the course of a number of launch attempts and finally got through this one. Big thanks to Astro Joe, Astro Jen, Mark Otto, Jeff Hansen, Rick Donner. Appreciate all of you for helping us out today. See, we've got a few more super chats to go through and thank folks before we go ahead and cut folks loose for the end of our broadcast. Certainly appreciative of all your support in our coverage. Thanks to Brian Weber for a $10 super chat. Thank you, Brian. SG with a $3 super chat. Thank you, SG. Randy, let's see, YouTube cut it off. Randy Pruden with a very generous $20 Canadian super chat. Thank you, Randy, for your support tonight. Skunk Hogger PS4, $10 for Flight 10. Thank you so much for your support tonight. James Wise with a very generous $50 super chat. Thank you so much, James, for supporting us at that level. Really appreciate that. Rocket Lady Elizabeth with a $10 super chat. Thank you, Elizabeth, who says, go SpaceX. Will Robinson Smith, Space Flight Now, as always. Such professional reporting. Thank you. Thanks. And mentioned it in a previous broadcast, but great to see you at the Space Coast Symposium and Expo this past week. Hike All Over with a $5 super chat, saying, where else can you go for a view like these? Jim Fowley, been a member with us now for 13 months at the pad leader level, asking when the first orbital flight scheduled for a Starship may be. As Stephen and I were just talking about, that will likely be a flight of the version 3 edition of the ship upper stage, which may fly as soon as later this year, but unclear if the first flight would be an orbital attempt by SpaceX, or if that may come a little bit further down the road, perhaps in early 2026. Psychonaut69 gifting a Spaceflight Now membership. Thank you, Psychonaut. Lloyd Green with a $10 super chat. Thank you, Lloyd, who says, great job by all from an envious watcher. Jeff Shiner with a $10 Canadian super chat. Thank you so much, Jeff, who says, checking in from Earth and looking forward to when a statement isn't given. Not entirely sure the meaning of that, but thank you, Jeff. Tom saying watching via our Starlink Gen 3 roam. Very cool. Mitchell Wilbur with a very generous $20 super chat. Thank you so much, Mitchell, one of our channel members, like Bill in Lauderdale with a $5 super chat, showing some love to the mods for all that they do. Renza2 with a $1 super chat. Thank you, Renz. Crystal C with a $2 super chat. Thank you, Crystal. Says, this is awesome. I appreciate you. Well, we appreciate you, Crystal. Thank you for your support tonight. Deb with a $10 super chat. Thank you, Deb. Who says, such an amazing adventure. Thank you, Spaceflight Now, for capturing history. And Cappy Cross, marking 17 months with us as a member at the mission specialist level, who says this was an amazing launch already. And that will go ahead and do it for us tonight, folks. Really appreciate all of you for hanging out with us. If this was your third time with us covering Starship Flight 10, you're a trooper. Thanks for being with us for all these attempts and final good flight of Mission 10 in the Starship Flight Development Program. As a reminder, though, if you haven't already gotten your fill of launches this week, we do have a couple of local launches here in Florida that are on tap. We've got one in, my goodness, in 10 hours and 19 minutes, lifting off from Pad 40 over at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. That is the Starlink 10-56 mission, set to add another 28 Starlink V2 mini satellites into low Earth orbit. And then coming up on Thursday morning at the, for some painfully early hour of 1:27 a.m. Eastern, launch of another 28 Starlink V2 mini satellites from Launch Complex 39A at the Kennedy Space Center. That mission will mark the first time that a Falcon booster launches for a 30th flight. So be sure to join us for that. The mission on tomorrow morning, though, that is going to be another SpaceX milestone you're going to want to see. That will be the 400th drone ship landing to date, if all goes well. We'll see a touchdown for SpaceX on the, it was the drone ship called Just Read the Instructions, is on tap for that 400th drone ship landing for a Falcon booster. Want to give a big thanks to our Spaceflight Now editor, Stephen Young, who's been running the technical operations of this broadcast today. One more thank you to our friend Stephen Clark, Spaceflight Now alum, now current reporter with Ars Technica, for joining us for all three broadcasts. Big thanks as well to our friends at Lab Padre for these views from South Padre Island, and right now looking at the thankfully empty Pad A down there at Starbase. If you're not already, you should be following Lab Padre on YouTube here. Go ahead and hit that subscribe button on their channel. They keep continuous tabs on various angles around the Starbase facilities. And be sure to give us a subscribe, or a subscription. It's been a long day. Hit that subscribe button underneath this video as well if you haven't already subscribed to our YouTube channel. Got lots and lots of things coming for you in the days, weeks, and months to come on SpaceX, on Blue Origin, Firefly, lots of things coming down the pike here on the YouTube channel. And of course, got the big Artemis 2 launch next year and some things in the hopper in the coming months in the run-up to that. For all of us here at Spaceflight Now, I'm Will Robinson Smith. Thank you one more time to our channel member community for all your ongoing support of our coverage in all of its forms. Be good to yourselves, be good to others. We will see you next time, folks. And until then, good night and bye-bye.